The Bible as a Handbook for Understanding Self. Part 6. By Shane Miller. The Book of Revelation. A Manual of Discipline. So much has been written and spoken about the life of the Messiah on earth as given in the four Gospels, that little or nothing can be added in this discussion. The summary given under the preceding section, Part 5, Prophets and Priests, seems sufficient for our purpose of portraying the evolved man. It might be mentioned here, however, that the EDGAR CAYCE material on the life and times of Jesus affords a most fascinating background for the narration as given in the Gospels. To proceed, then, and take up the thread of narrative beginning with the Acts of the Apostles after Jesus had passed from the material scene, we encounter another controversial figure. This is Saul, or Paul, probably the second most controversial figure in the New Testament. As a matter of fact, most of the New Testament from this point on has been given over to Paul's letters to the various congregations scattered about the Mediterranean area. Here again we find man inclined unto error. Even in the setting up of these groups for the spreading of the gospel throughout the world, there were errors and disputations at every step, false applications of true doctrine, misunderstandings, politics, rioting, all sorts of situations and conditions arising from personal ambitions, lust for power and influence, and all the well-known human foibles. Saul, or Paul after his conversion, was kept busy not only traveling about the Mediterranean basin, teaching and preaching, but also writing epistles to the various congregations to keep them in line during his absence. As one studies the nature of the troubles that arose among these unsophisticated new congregations, one observes that these are really case histories. These are the kinds of events encountered by laymen whenever they set up groups for the purpose of spiritual development. These experiences were so typical that the Church has largely used Paul's epistles as guides in coping with the same problems as they arise in churches today. Indeed, so diligent was Paul in dealing with the trouble spots that the claim has been made that whereas Jesus freed the worshipper from the Mosaic law, Paul set up new restrictions to take the place of the old. Peter, Paul, Silas, Mark, Barnabas, and other missionaries of this period could not be expected to live forever. Who was to follow, to take Paul's position of watchdog for the growing congregations? Who was to protect the young explorers into the realms of the Spirit from the ravening wolves, the temptations that lay ever in their paths? How would it be possible to build a church out of these groups of neophytes, a church so strong that the gates of hell should not prevail against it, as the Master promised? The whole story of man in the Bible shows that man is prone to error and that congregations are made up of groups of men and women, thus compounding the potential for error. Where would the new Peters and Pauls come from? The answer apparently lies in the message of John, writing from his situation of banishment on the island of Patmos. This has come to be known to us as the Book of Revelation. The message of Revelation, in brief, is that the layman who aspires deeply enough to know the way can learn it firsthand through prayer and meditation. It is possible, says this book, to make a direct approach to the source through the Christ consciousness. The result will be that greater works, that the layman can do because Jesus has gone unto the Father. Unfortunately, however, this message is concealed beneath a vast symbology of angels, dragons, cities, beasts, and jewels. So that it has come to be that when we seek to know what is really said and meant, laymen and theologians alike shake their heads over it. Here at the very end of our Bible is a manual of discipline which, if understood, could give us the key not only to the entire body of scriptures preceding it but also to knowledge of ourselves. No doubt there were, in the day of its writing, a select few who could read this cryptogram with understanding. And no doubt it was directed toward those from whom would come in time the future Peters and Pauls. In this way, too, no doubt the uninitiated were spared innumerable difficulties through their tendencies to misapply spiritual truths for personal aggrandizement. Yet the book persisted, a tantalizing enigma, held up eternally before the earnest Bible student, saying by its very presence, "Solve me if you can." One of its most repeated passages advises, "He that hath an ear, let him hear." Here again our key to the meaning was supplied by the Cayce readings. They made possible the unstopping of our ears so that we could hear and understand. Mr. Cayce gave a reading, a physical one, for a young boy with a bodily disturbance. The reading noted at the end of its diagnosis that the doctor who would attend this boy would benefit greatly if he read the Book of Revelation. So in the next reading the question was asked why a doctor or anyone else should read the Book of Revelation, since it was so heavily screened in the symbology of John. Then the information began coming through. Thereafter many readings were taken on this subject. The Book of Revelation, it was disclosed, is really a kind of map of the human system. It shows the relationship between the various parts of the body, shows that the mind is not situated in the human head alone, but that mind has its cells in every part of the body, down to the cell level, and that these mind cells must be kept in their proper relationships for health. A great deal is told about the endocrine system, which is symbolized by the 7 churches. The setting of the drama. The book begins with a statement by John of his condition in Patmos and that he was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Edgar Cayce's interpretation of this is that John is in deep meditation, trance perhaps, but free of bodily influences. All that follows in the Book of Revelation is an account of John's experiences while in this state. The great voice that John hears is coming from behind him. When he turns around he beholds the 7 golden candlesticks, and in the midst of the 7 candlesticks one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot and girt about with a golden girdle. His description is in detail: hair white like wool and white as snow, eyes like a flame of fire, feet like molten brass, and a voice as the sound of many waters. In his vision John is overcome by fright and falls down as if dead. The figure approaches him and says, "Fear not, I am the first and the last, I am he that liveth, and was dead, and, behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen." This is to be John's instructor all through the experience he is describing. This is John's other self, that part of John which remains ever in the presence of the Creator and is never soiled by direct contact with earth experience, hence is garbed in the symbol of purity, white. He is, in modern terminology, John's superconscious mind, operating from a universal level, the same level that brought the stars, the galaxies and the planets into being. In his custody is the control of all John's bodily functions, a control he maintains through John's endocrine system, the breathing, the heartbeat, digestive forces, and so on. The 7 churches are the meeting places where body, mind, and spirit come together, the control points. The symbology which gives us this clue is in the passage. And he had in his right hand control, 7 stars, mind cells, one in each of the 7 glandular centers through which to maintain control and balance at these key points. Candlesticks are also used to show mind cells in the churches, glandular centers, according to the Cayce material. Act 2. The Instructions. John's instructor begins by bidding him to adjust and align the various centers of his body, starting with the gonads, then going to the lydon, the adrenals, the thymus, the thyroid, the pituitary, and ending with the pineal. The reason is to bring each one of the glandular centers back to its original purpose. The activities that will take place in the body, as a result, are described. The mind is not located in the head only, the revelation is telling us. Since the mind, any mind, is suggestible, even in the bodily parts, the implication is given. Through prayer and the autosuggestion implicit in various rituals and activities cheerfully entered into, the healing and alignment of any and all parts of the body are possible. This is the message cloaked in the symbology of the warnings given through John to the 7 churches. This is what the instructor, or John's overself, is really saying. The endocrine centers have long been out of balance. There is too much listing and leaning toward the physical. There is too much concern with stimulation from that side. Chapter 4 gives John a symbolic picture of the state of his mind during his meditation. The instructor shows him the throne, or the seat of the superconscious, in a position of perfect control. The 24 elders seated before the throne symbolize the 24 cranial nerves that lead to the senses. The sea of glass is the symbol of the emotions perfectly controlled. At that point where the animal urges of the body, symbolized here by the 4 beasts, acknowledge the sovereignty of the spirit, the senses relinquish their control of the consciousness and cast their crowns before the throne, symbol of rulership. Act 3. The real lessons. When this perfect control of body, mind, and spirit is achieved, John is ready for the real lessons, the lessons that will come from the deepest levels of consciousness. The Lamb, symbolizing John's spiritualized new self, evolved, as it were, to Christ's consciousness, is now shown taking a book from the hand of him that sat upon the throne. This is to point out that control of the book, or body, and all it contains has up to this point been in the custody of the overself. The real individuality which has never left its situation of divinity. What is now proposed is that bodily control of John's heartbeats, his breathing, his healing forces, all those functions that in the normal man are under superconscious control, be put into John's own hands. He is to be the master of his elements, as well as his environment, on the conscious level. The book, or body of John, is shown to be sealed on the back by 7 seals. To open the book and read it, as every individual must do sooner or later, in the business of knowing himself, the seals must be broken. The 7 centers of the endocrine system of the body are the points of control, and their energies must be released under conditions of perfect balance. From this point on, our narrative describes just what happens as a result of the opening of each one of the 7 glandular centers of the body. As each is opened, apparent chaos follows, but this is by way of cleansing and purifying the center. When John finally takes control of the book, or body, now open, he is instructed to eat it, that is, to digest or assimilate its lesson. He finds it sweet as honey, in his mouth, but it makes his belly bitter, that is, such knowledge and lore are pleasant to hear about, but to experience them through application is bitter, indeed. After this takes place, the angel tells John that he will find no knowledge withheld from him. The mystery of God shall be finished, and the voice of the 7th angel shall guide him through the awakening of all his universal memories as well as personal ones. This would indicate a state of complete superconsciousness. Indeed, this would explain the divine powers of the Master himself. His bodily control, his sources of supply for body and mind, his ability to set aside human limitation in the healing of the sick and the raising of the dead, his clairvoyance, his clairaudience, and his control over all elements, even to the point of being able to walk on the waters of Galilee. Chapter 11 goes on to give John some understanding of the mechanism for healing and supply, which is operating within him. The forces of the supply and healing magnetism are symbolized by 2 olive trees and 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. This implies that the two functions of healing and supply have intelligence, and can shut themselves off, bringing about scarcity and sickness whenever the lower nature becomes too powerful in its warring to secure control over them. Scarcity and illness can in time, however, so weaken the beast or carnal forces, that the healing and supply can be turned on again. In all probability, this alternates throughout one's life unless or until control over the beast's nature is secured. Here, then, is the point at which John now stands. Control of the forces of healing and supply is being put into his hands. Jesus, with this part of his mind under perfect control, could not only feed himself, "I have meat to eat that ye know not of," but could feed 5,000. He could not only keep free of illness but also heal the sick and raise the dead, yes, even himself. Mankind as a whole. John now moves into what we would call today the collective unconscious. This vast reservoir of composite human experience has its own memory, and John is shown the nature of the soul of man and its situation of hazard. The symbology used for showing this is that of the woman in travail, the dragon, and the beasts. Out of the soul of man is born the conscious mind, with the dragon of self-will waiting to devour the new creature as soon as it appears. To forestall it, the soul, as the woman, is withdrawn from the scene. Henceforth the soul shall abide in a place of concealment. Collective man will be constantly attacked, however, through the emotions as well as the body, by carnal forces of rebellion, by outward evidences of strength and power. Indeed, all the miracles of the spiritual man will seemingly be duplicated, and earthly institutions created by man for his own use will in time turn on their creator, like Frankenstein monsters. Man will worship the creatures of his hands, so completely absorbed in his worship that all memory of his relationship to the true Creator will be lost. His instruments for creative expression, education, government, economy, radio, press and television, his whole civilization, will cause him to bow down as his life force is being sucked out of him. This will be done by the very instruments he had set up to serve him. Man's misuse of psychic or soul power, to feed the beasts, and keep his mechanisms going, is shown in the symbolism of the great horde that sitteth upon many waters. Such a misuse works on man through his emotions. Babylon, the false structure, is the result. However, so many of man's energies are drawn off to maintain his feelings of earthly status that the whole creation, of itself, ultimately collapses completely. Babylon, the Great, falls, and individuals who have worshipped the beast and given their strength to keep him alive are now bereft of all opportunity for action. Man's life in earthly pursuits has ended. God's life in man can now begin. At this point in John's vision of the collective mind of man, not only is its beginning shown in the narrative of its past, but a kind of collective intent is shown. This expresses and secures its future. The city foursquare. The marriage of the bride and the Lamb is now proclaimed. This symbolizes that when man realizes, after the collapse of his own structures, that the real Creator is the divinity within him and not his own lusts. When he turns away from his own selfish patterns for living, then he is realigned once more with the true creative forces. To be sure, there will be backslidings, through the ages, for the dragon that caused all the commotion in the past has merely been shut away for a period, a breather for man, we hope. After 1,000 years, John tells us, the dragon is still alive down there in the collective Ed. He can rise up again any time man forgets his divine nature. The soul is now described as a city foursquare, a mathematical symbol of perfection, a city filled with the treasures of the earth and refined through suffering, Earth experiences designed by the Father for His children. The city has no temple because the whole city soul is the temple. It has no stars or sun or moon shining to give it light, for its light comes from within, and there are no shadows. The tree of life is now shown to be in flourishing condition, bringing forth regular supply in such a way that the vast structures of man's egotistic imaginings are no longer necessary as long as the pure river of water of life flows out of the throne of God and of the Lamb, or as long as the will of God and man are one. John then tries to worship his instructor through all this revelation, thinking him sufficiently divine. But the over-self instructor says, "See thou do it not, for I am thy fellow servant, worship God." The instructor goes on to explain that he is Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Since God has no beginning nor end, this figure is obviously not God. But when he identifies himself with Jesus, the picture comes a little clearer. At this point in the narrative, man is presumed to have been redeemed not only as an individual but as a race. The only figure able to bring that about is the fulfilled Christ, guardian of the race and guide for the individual man. In conclusion, John points out that the book, or body, is the vehicle for human experience in the earth. Through this body, man learns his lessons and experiences here. There can be no shortcuts or meanderings without dire consequences. This is the warning. Certainly every incident of the Master's life externalized and demonstrated the truth of everything given in the book of Revelation. As the pattern for us all, he could say, "Greater works than these shall he who believes do, because I go unto my Father." As we compare the gifts of the disciples with the gifts of the Master, we begin to see this one thing. Here is the reconciliation of many men to their first estate, with its ability to perform miracles, its ability to foresee and foretell, all the natural heritage of man. These are normally man's gifts. Because of our experiences in the earth, we have lost them. Now, as we return to our search, the assurance is that we shall regain them one by one. Here are the things for which we must work. We have a long way to go, but the book of Revelation gives some of the milestones in our journey.